Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Four Female Founders podcast series, where we are helping women in business learn to thrive, not just survive. I am your host, Sarah Bundy, and today my guest is Cathy Skala. Cathy is the CEO of CureX and an experienced board director, drawing on more than 30 years of global leadership with Fortune 250 companies, including Abbott, Baxter, Hospira, and Pfizer. She guides organizations through transformation, growth, and value creation. She's also known for asking probing questions, balancing risk with innovation, and driving clarity. Cathy champions alignment over consensus and sees culture, curiosity, and clarity as undervalued assets in the boardroom. Cathy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate being here.
Likewise. I'm excited for today's conversation because we're going to talk about something that we actually have not spoken about before on this show. And it's about helping founders understand and be ready for an eventual exit, some kind of an acquisition, or even a strategic investment, and how to work with boards of directors and prep for the board of director conversations in the process of exiting or going through an acquisition. You have so many years of experience doing this. And as I'd mentioned in our intro, you've worked with Fortune 250 companies. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got onto boards, what your board experience has been like, and what do we need to know about boards in general?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I think my first exposure to boards was when I joined a nonprofit board. And I am a big believer that if you join a nonprofit board for the right reasons, you can get a lot out of it. Plus, you're really helping a mission driven organization, and that is fantastic. A lot of nonprofits really focus on the donation part, but governance of the boards is really important as well, and especially for startup companies. I think my second exposure was when I had to present to the board of some of the companies that you mentioned, and really understanding the questions they're asking and what they were concerned about really gave me kind of that opposite perspective of what I would like to ask and know about a company when I join a board. So I'm on the board, two advisory boards for for startups, and that's been a fantastic learning experience. And I'll bring some of that into this conversation.
With Awin's marketing technology platform, you can easily discover the best partners who connect you with huge audiences of new customers. Understand how your partnerships are performing with intuitive reporting and only pay for the results you need. Start today and grow your own way with Awin.
That's great. I appreciate it very much. And it's interesting because I feel like a lot of founders are really focused on building their companies, but very rarely do they think far enough in advance about, hey, one day I might actually want to exit, or one day we might get acquired. Can you tell us a little bit about what should founders start thinking about now to be M&A ready, and why?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because really, in order to get a lot of investors, they're going to want to know what is your exit strategy because they're going to want to get the money that they've invested in you. And some of them have different horizons. Some are 3, some are 5, some are 10 years. So for those investors that have a short rampway, you really want to start to think about it as soon as possible, because they're going to want to ask you that when you're going for funding. So I think it start early. It reduces the surprises, maximizes your valuation, and it's really a way in which to think about where you're positioning your product.
A great big thank you to our sponsors, PartnerStack. PartnerStack's ecosystem connects you to the world's largest B2B network for you to earn, connect, and grow.
And what are some of the signals and milestones that, in your experience, you've seen indicate that a business might be actually ready for an exit or ready for a potential merger or acquisition?
Yeah, I think, really knowing what your revenue stream is and that you are actually generating sales and profit is definitely the first signal. I think making sure you're really clear on who owns the IP, because a lot of people don't want to get into legal battles after the fact, that you're scalable.
Right.
and that you really understand compliance. Because once a company that's of larger size acquires you, you're more on the radar from a lot of regulatory agencies than you would be if you were smaller.
Is there a difference between compliance and governance from a board of director perspective?
Yes, I think so. I think that governance is really much more about who gets to make which decisions and things to make sure that you're operating smoothly and looking and balancing risk.
Mm.
It's really focused on risk, where compliance has to do a lot more with how are you meeting the regulatory requirements that any government agency might have.
Versus compliance, which is
Oh, is that what I just said? That's what compliance is
compared to
meeting the regulatory
government.
requirements.
So the
Yes,
the governance side is really around the people and making sure that they understand the rules, and then the compliance is making sure you're following the rules.
correct. I'm going to say that next time.
Glad we can clarify that. All good. Now, you've served on a number of boards. What are some of the key things that boards look for when they're assessing a company's value or growth strategy? You already mentioned, are they profitable? Do they have cash flow? Do they have revenue? What are some of those other things they're going to keep an eye out for?
Whether you have succession planning, whether your team is really strong or they're going to have to revamp it completely. I think that, on the operational side, making sure that your finances have been audited and clean. I think, there's a lot of complexity depending on how large you are with your IT systems. And so making sure there's some fit. But as you mentioned in my introduction, the thing that I focus on the most is culture.
Mm.
Because if the two cultures don't really mesh well, particularly if the founder isn't ready to give up their baby yet, um, it's a challenging acquisition.
Can we talk a little bit about the emotional hold that some founders have on their baby, since you brought it up? Because I have experienced this personally. My companies have been acquired. My last one was acquired. I thought it was my baby. It was actually very difficult for me to give it up. Uh,
Hmm.
let's talk a little bit about that and how boards help founders through that emotional let go, and how common actually is that?
Yeah, I think it's very common. I mean, especially if you really believed in what you were doing, you started it from the very beginning, you put sweat equity into it, nights, days, whatever it took. And so all of that emotion is hard to process. Now it's somebody else's job. I'm not doing that anymore. And so I think it's really interesting for founders to ask for a seat on the board when they're being acquired, as opposed to playing an operational role, because you're going to want to play it the way you played it in the past. And the board is going to more than likely have different ideas about how they want to, either if it's a merger, integrate the business into their existing business, or if it's just a straight out, I'm going to buy you out, they're going to think, well, I'm going to bring this and this and this into play. And that may not be what you had done in the past. So for me, it's really about making sure that you as a founder are prepared for that, that you start to think about that in advance and you get a feel for who you're doing business with in the future. Are they going to keep things the way they are? Are they going to make them really different? Can you live with that? And, the more information um, the better prepared you can be.
What are some of the most common mistakes that you see founders make when they're approaching or speaking to a board of directors for the very first time about a potential acquisition or merger?
I think you have to And this is kind of true for anything you're approaching. You have to put yourself in the shoes of who you're presenting to or who you're pitching to. What do they want to know? Not what you're ready to share with them or what you think is important for them to know. So, a lot of the operational details are not necessarily what they are going to be interested in. They're going to want to know, how are you balancing risk? What's on the horizon for you? Where are you underutilizing capacity or people? And so it's really behooves you to say, what are, like, if you were to do a typical SWOT, they'd want to know the results of that. They'd want to know who's your competitors, what's your threats, what's your opportunities,
Right.
as opposed to, I got this big customer and we're going to do great because of that.
Right.
I think the other thing, sorry to interrupt because I know you
No,
have
you're
a follow on question, but I think the other thing is being way too optimistic about your financials.
good. Yeah, I think a lot of people think there is value where the value isn't there yet. And potential is not necessarily results yet. So making
I
sure
think
there's
that,
a pragmatic approach to looking at the finances
yeah,
and the opportunity. Actually, I find it really interesting because in my acquisition that we went through, so much of it, there were so many variables. There's the green light, the orange light, the red light, right? And so what I found was boards of directors and the people who are looking to go through this potential acquisition process have their checklist of things they're looking out for, and you're going to get graded on certain things. And if all of your eggs are in one basket with your biggest client, that's a huge risk. You're not going to get a green light on that. If you've been unprofitable 3 out of 5 years in a row, that's a bit of a red flag. Why is that? Is there a growth strategy? How much can you expand and diversify? Is that a green light, red light, orange light, right? So there's a lot of different variables that I think people need to think about when they're preparing to grow and also when they're preparing for a potential exit.
yeah,
Anything
I,
you want to
I
add to that?
agree. And having those KPIs in advance before you even start to think about it, so you know where you're at. It's completely unreasonable to think everything's going to be green. But if you have a story and a strategy for how you're going to get there, that's what people are interested in just as much as what color is it.
Mm-hmm. And we had talked a little bit about governments earlier in the conversation. What can early stage and growth stage founders do right now to implement the right kind of governance into their organizations without slowing anything down? Do you have any tips for us?
Yeah, I think that's, you either have what I'll call governance geeks, and they just, geek out on, well, we have to have this process and we have to have it documented and we have to have these rules for the sake of, as opposed to, what do we need right now that's going to help us
Mm-hmm.
become a better operating company? And so it really needs to be a light touch to begin with. I don't think you should come in hard. I think you need to make sure that you start with advisory boards so you kind of get a feel for what boards can do, but not, they don't have the fiduciary responsibility. They're simply advising. You can say, thank you, take it or leave it. With a true governing board, that's not as easy to do because you report to them.
Right.
And so they have a lot more control. I think you have to avoid complexity, and you need some independent advisors that will help you with your risk profile and help you understand what are those KPIs to be setting up for now.
Do you think it's better for organizations to come with a board of directors or an advisory board when they're going to talk to a potential acquiring board? Or does it matter? Like, do you need to have a board if you're running an organization, or is it fine to be on your own? What's your advice there?
So I would say if you're looking for an IPO strategy, it's a requirement. You
Okay.
have to. Um, for acquisitions, you don't have to, but that'll be another green, red light thing. Do you have somebody governing you right now? And it'll be a telltale sign for how well is this acquisition going to go? Because if this company isn't used to people telling them what to do, and now we are going to come in and do that, um, that could be a red flag for some acquirers who don't have the expertise in kind of hand holding people along the path and showing them this is how it works.
Mm. So, what advice do you have for founders that do not yet have boards? They haven't worked for somebody in a lot of years. They don't particularly report to anybody yet. Let's say they say, okay, I would actually like to prepare to exit in the next 5 years. One of the assets I can bring in this that could be a green light for the consideration team is I have 3 to 5 people on an advisory board that I can report to. I can build that team right now, and then when I get to that acquisition, we are in a good shape. I have all the right people. The consideration team and company sees how well we work together, and this is a really solid unit. What does that look like? Let's say someone's going to start tomorrow and they're going to build their advisory board. Who do you need on that board, and what kind of skills are you looking for?
So I would first be really honest with myself about what I bring to the table and what my team brings to the table, because there's going to be gaps. And so one of the things you want to think about are, what are those gaps and how can I fill those gaps with skills from other people that could become on this advisory board. I think that in addition to the gaps, you can think about advisory boards as bringing credibility to your business. So if you are doing anything in a particular profession where you want to have, excuse me, medical experience or legal experience or financial experience, those are often really good advisory board members, because not only do they maybe fill a gap, but they're also giving you credibility where you can say, this person has been in the business and in the industry for 30 years. They've been our advisor. So I think if you think about the gaps, you prioritize trust and the chemistry over big
Accolade.
names. Pardon me?
Or
What were you?
accolade.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Because the chemistry is the most important. If people, you have to trust them to take their advice, and they have to trust you to give advice. And, there's this whole thing I'm going to give a talk on about trust at the board level, because the chemistry can either work for you or you can avoid talking to your advisory board because it's such a chore and they're grilling you. And those are not the people you want.
So let's talk about how to choose those people. Let's say I don't know anybody in finance. I don't know anybody in legal. I don't know anybody senior enough who's strong and has the clout in tech. Where do I even start? And then how do I convince those people to actually come and join my board? Do I need to offer compensation? Is it a volunteer role? Do they get equity? Like, what does that even look like?
So let's stay on advisory boards, so that there's no confusion. So with advisory boards, I would first go to your network. First, the people that are working for you. If you have, let's say, somebody doing your financial work and reviewing your numbers on your team, who do they look to? Who are their mentors? Same thing with legal. But I would also expand it beyond any organization, professional organizations that you are a member of, and look at those networks and talk to people that you really admire, because their networks can benefit you. If you get along with them, there's kind of a good chance you'll get along with people that get along with them as well. So it's really a network-based thing. In terms of comp, a lot of advisory boards do not get comp. The members just are doing it because they're giving back. There could be some equity, but you have to be careful about giving away too much equity in the very beginning. They can use your, like I'm doing right now, you can use your company name on my portfolio and my resume for what I'm looking for in terms of future boards. So, yeah, I worked on this advisory board. I know that will give you experience to work on, a public company board of similar scale and nature. So it can be a real give and take. But I think first and foremost, you really want people you can trust.
That's great. And I'd like to really get some actionable items for the founders who are listening to this, because if they're going to go and get some strategic advisors, an advisory board, I imagine there's some things that they're going to need to do first in order to make sure those people do say, yes, I trust you, I believe in you, I believe in the potential of this organization, I believe in your purpose. Whether it's teams, systems, finances, legal contracts, what are the foundational things that founders can prepare today before they even go and ask somebody to come and join their board?
So if somebody were asking me and they were not someone that I knew, I would want to see the information that you would prepare for a financial pitch. I'd want to understand just kind of all of the basics. What are your financials? What is your strategy? What does your team look like? What are the CVs for those people? Um, what uh, what a demo of what your product does, who your target clients are, who your competitors are, all of the same kinds of information, because I'd want to see where I fit in. How can I help you? Do I have the right networks for that could be potential clients for you? Do I see things in what you're showing me that I think are risks that I could help you solve for? I do think that it's also useful to say that advisory boards tend to be a lot more operationally focused than governance focused. They can really, and again, you don't have to take their advice, but they can really help with, well, have you thought about this? And, in other companies, I've seen that. Or, there was one girl that I was talking to, a woman, and she thought that what her customer was X. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't it be Y? I'm trying to understand. And she's like, well, those are my competitors. And I'm like, but the information you're trying to provide is what they need. And she was like, huh, I never thought about it like that. So you're kind of looking for people who will see around the corners that you can't see and help you think probably with more clarity.
Yeah, perspective goes a really long way. And that's why, people talk a lot about diversity, because with these diverse experiences and backgrounds and skill sets and life experiences, you can kind of come in from different angles and see opportunity where other people might see risk or competition. So I appreciate that example very much. Now, you have led some teams through some pretty significant changes, M&As, acquisitions, transformation. How do you manage two teams in a transformation when it comes to leadership, culture, and communication?
Yeah, this is the $50 million question that everybody wants to get right, and yet how they go about it a lot of times just misses the mark. I think first and foremost, transparency of the what you're doing and the why you're doing it are critical. If there isn't a why that you can clearly articulate to all the stakeholders, they're not going to buy in, and they're not going to offer true help in making sure that acquisition is successful. They're going to put roadblocks in your way all of the time. So getting your why and being transparent kind of run parallel with open communications. And often, I mean, people always thought that they'd come into my office and they'd ask me questions, which we had communicated multiple times, and yet they were still convinced that the answer was in my bottom desk drawer that I wasn't sharing with them. And if they could just get in that drawer and see what was happening, they'd have the secret answer. And I'm like, we are telling you as much as we know at this point. You can't know everything 100% at the very beginning. So as soon as we've made decisions and know something, we're going to communicate it to you, even if it's stuff you don't want to hear. Because I feel like I'm being more fair to you, giving you more advance notice of what we're doing, and again, the why, so you can make decisions that you need to make for your own life.
I think that's great. And you talk a lot about establishing trust and ensuring clarity in these transitions and in this process. What tips do you have for our listeners about establishing that trust and clarity in any kind of process, whether it's today and they're a startup and one day they would like to exit, or they're now today preparing to go to market and can be considered for an acquisition?
So let me just make sure, the how do you build trust kind of thing, is that
Yes,
where
for
you're
building
getting?
trust and
Yeah,
clarity in whatever process they're
yeah,
in right
clarity. Okay. So I think the first thing is that you truly have to show empathy and active listening.
now.
If you come in with a playbook, and there's plenty of examples where people have done that. They come in with a playbook, um, don't really care what you say. This is how we do it. Thank you very much. That can work. You probably aren't going to retain a lot of the people that were working there. And if that's your goal, then great. But if you really need some of the key leaders, and particularly the innovation people, whatever group that might be, to stick around because you really are buying that IP, their knowledge, um, consider giving them retention bonuses. Consider being very open and honest with them. Avoid rumors. Rumors are the death. I used to play this game. Anybody could call in, and it was called Dispel a Rumor. And so if people had heard rumors, they'd call into this open office hours for an hour, anybody, and they'd tell me what the rumor was, and I'd go, that's interesting. Most of them made me laugh because they were so untrue. And some of them were just kind of twists on information. So I was able to set the record straight. So you really have to listen and be concerned. And I think the most critical step to building trust is putting yourself in their shoes. Again, I've used that twice now, but um, I know that when I was being acquired by a company and they did the exact opposite of what I'm saying here and how I felt, it really makes you pause to think, how do people want to be treated? And if you can treat them the way you want to be treated, that whole golden rule, simple as it is, I think it works.
Still holds true. That's great. I appreciate that. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but we do have time for one last question, which is, now that you have gone through your own experience being acquired, you've served on multiple boards, and you've served on Fortune 250 boards, and you're on that seat where you're considering companies that are, pitching you. What are some things or a piece of advice for founders who are women in business where they often don't know this one thing? They miss the mark. It's just something that they like. You come in, you're on the receiving end of this pitch, and you're like, oh, if only you knew that before you walked into this boardroom, that would have actually closed the deal. What is that one thing that you want to leave our listeners with today?
So I really think it's go in bold. Go in bold, own the room, own your pride in what you've built, and show everybody else why it's just as valuable to them as it is to you.
I love it. Thank you so much, Cathy. So great to chat with you today. If anybody wants to keep in touch or reach out to you with questions, what's the best way to contact you?
Probably email scalacathy@gmail.com. Pretty easy. I'm on LinkedIn a lot too, so people can reach me there.
Perfect. Cathy Skala, thank you so much for being on the show, and we will see you guys on the next episode.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the 4 Female Founders podcast series. If you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe, like, or comment below so we can continue to support women in business by helping them thrive, not just survive. We'll see you on the next show.